you have to think about like what this country looked like before people were here. Basically, you would have these herds of bison, like 4 to 6 million strong, would come through the Bighorn Basin every year. So there was this high intensity grazing happening, but then there was this big rest period that would follow.
Our historical writings, when our family homesteaded the Arizona Strip in 1916, they said grass was stirrup high and they could dry farm anything. In about 5 to 10 years, the water cycle broke and they couldn't do anything.
At some point, we have to come back to the foundation that like nature knows best. We're not smarter than that, and we've completely gone away from it.
Welcome back to Decentralized Radio, your one-stop shop for education on how you can take back control of your health and your wealth and live outside of the centralized systems that are plaguing our society. We're hosting industry experts every Tuesday live and also releasing podcasts Friday morning. We have AJ Richards here, founder, president of Found the Farm, correct?
From the farm, yeah.
From the farm. So AJ is working on a company that's building out a parallel system to help regenerative ranchers market their product, basically handling the business side, the direct-to-consumer front, so that ranchers can focus on what they're doing best, and that's ranching and restoring the land. And that is exactly what RC Carter is doing, based in Tensley, Wyoming, where I get my beef from. It's incredible nutrient density proven as well. And yeah, let's kick it off maybe with a question around what is regenerative ranching or farming, and why is it important? It's an open-ended one, but maybe RC could take a stab at it.
I mean, there's a number of people trying to define it, and there's also like certifications that are coming out if you're, are you regenerative? And I don't really like to be put in a box. I think my definition of regenerative ranches, because it's such a spectrum, would be just basically operating more in synchronicity with nature, and more along the lines of the systems that before commodity agriculture came to be. Less chemicals, more logic.
I'm not a producer. I come from 5 generations of ranchers. I'm a Bundy, so I'm predisposed to be anti-government, hence the tinfoil hat. We built this platform to help folks like RC. We're really helping all producers. We think that through collaboration, some producers will learn that maybe not be regenerative. None of my family are regenerative. Got my teeth kicked in a few times trying to encourage that route. Learned that if we can help affect the bottom line and the dollar, and then by relation, they're next to guys like RC who can show massive savings in inputs, which then become a decentralized producer because you're not relying on inputs. We might be able to help make some progress there. So we're just here to be an advocate for our producers. I work for the producers. We have this company, but everything we have done and designed comes from them, and all our future iterations will come from what they see needs to be done.
For you guys, what was like a turning point? This is obviously a popular movement, but you're saying you came from a family of, conventional ranchers. RC, I know you've kind of had your own spin and transformation. Like, when did you realize, and what made you have that realization that regenerative raising of animals is really the most important thing to be focusing on in terms of producing food?
For me, I never liked sitting in a tractor for like 17 hours on end. So I got out of college, I came back to the ranch, decided that's what I'm going to dedicate my life to. We just, any money we made, we just sunk it back into the ranch, because the approach was, I want the ranch to work for me, not me necessarily working for it. Because every old rancher, they're a lifelong rancher, they're arthritic, they're tired, a lot of them are grouchy because it's hard work. So we got all the infrastructure put into place, and the next logical move was like, hey, we need to raise corn. And I was like, man, it's more hydraulic fluid, more, hours on your ass sitting in the tractor. And so I started educating myself, like Alan Savory, Joel Salatin, and that was kind of the lead into it. When I realized I was doing it wrong, which was like a huge gut check, because we thought we were doing things pretty on point. But I went to soils conference, and I heard Dr. Alan Williams talk, and I came back from that feeling like, I'd been to the moon and back, and I was like, oh man, we need to do better. And so that was, and then one more story. So in Wyoming, we have this weevil that afflicts alfalfa plants. So if you have commodity, monocrop fields, every spring you get this little bitty weevil that afflicts the plant. And the way to deal with it is you either cut your hay early and you sacrifice your yields, or you spray them with this chemical. So I had a field, it was like 60-acre field, and literally a gallon and a half of this chemical will kill it. And you're supposed to be really careful. So I tried, I didn't have rubber gloves, but I ended up with some of this stuff on my eyelid, and then like somehow got it under my armpit, and it burned for 3 days and water wouldn't wash it off. And I was like, what the heck is this stuff? So that was kind of the, one of the catalysts to transition.
If you're a health conscious food consumer who's also very active, you know how big of a struggle it is to find a bar that is both convenient and nutrient dense. That's why I was so excited when I discovered the Alpa Bar. The Alpa Bar is a meat-based bar that contains only simple ingredients, 100% grass-fed beef, tallow, and honey, and is both nutrient dense and convenient, and packs a caloric punch of over 300 calories. For me, this was a game changer and is now the go-to snack and fuel source I use when I'm hiking, camping, hunting, skiing, or doing anything in the outdoors and I don't have the resources to cook a full meal. The Alpa Bar is made proudly in Colorado and only uses locally sourced meat. JJ and Rob are also extremely based and accept Bitcoin for payment. I highly recommend you check out the Alpa Bar for any time you need a nutrient-dense and convenient snack on the go. Check them out at eatalpa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout to get a 5% discount. And if you pay in Bitcoin, you can get an additional discount on top of that. That's eataupa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout.
For my I came across Alan Williams and Gabe Brown and Alan Savory, and our historical writings when our family homesteaded the Arizona Strip in 1916, they said grass was stirrup high and they could dry farm anything. In about 5 to 10 years, the water cycle broke and they couldn't do anything. So they all had to move from the Arizona Strip where they had homesteaded and settled into town, which is St. George, Utah, because it wasn't sustainable anymore. And so knowing that that was the history, and then hearing and learning from these other guys who are doing this around the world, especially in brittle environments where you would assume it wouldn't matter because of the lack of rainfall, they were showing that that's not true. It's how they cycle the animals. So that's what exposed me to it. And then, like I was saying, trying to present that idea, especially being the city slicker nephew, good luck. So I learned through other other people like Neil Spackman. Neil Spackman did this project in Saudi Arabia called the El Baida Project. And if you look it up on YouTube, it's phenomenal. He restored a desert just on its annual monsoon rainfall, which was something like 4 inches, and now it's grass fields again. But what he learned was, unless you impact the economics of the people in those regions, it doesn't matter what actions you take, because those forests were wiped out because of they were starving. So they'd cut down the trees, sold the firewood, and so forth. And so that's where I shifted from trying to go directly into promoting the practices of regenerative agriculture to starting to learn about our food supply chain and the economics and where the dollar is going, right? Producers get 14 cents to 30 cents on the dollar. Well, if we can help change that and show the impacts, the financial impacts, by reducing inputs and then increasing volume of livestock that you can raise, then maybe we can start showing different paths to loosely use the term, a more sustainable practice, so they could increase their yields. I mean, these guys are running on hundreds of thousands of acres because most of it's BLM grazing land, and yet their carrying capacity, and this is also policy driven, but their carrying capacity on hundreds of thousands of acres is a few hundred head of cattle. That doesn't work for us as consumers. We are at the lowest cattle number since 1950, and there's a lot of things that have to change in that. But same people is who encouraged me to get into that practice.
What do you think is the main root causes as to why this became such a mess? You know, for those who aren't aware, the beef industry specifically is probably one of the most centralized industries. The 4 companies control 80% of the beef supply. And, you know, there are alternative solutions, and that's why we're here talking about regenerative ag. But what really caused this? Because it is multifactorial, but I'm curious to hear your guys' perspective, because it helps paint the picture of how do we solve this now, and how do we educate and convince more ranchers and producers to move over?
Well, I think that one of the most important things, because it's so complicated, when you dive into the food system, you end up in the soil, you end up in the food, you end up in the money, and you know, we're out trying to fix the soil and fix the food, but at the end of the day, if you don't fix the money, like, you're not fixing anything. And so that's why Bitcoin makes a heck of a lot of sense. Just a little history lesson on the soil side of it is, like, the last bison, you know, I was just looking up here in this sunny patch, you can almost see some of the trails, some of the terracing. And so you have to think about, like, what this country looked like before people were here, before there was a written record of it. And basically you would have these herds of bison, like 4 to 6 million strong, would come through the Bighorn Basin every year. And one year they would go that way, and then one year they would come this way. So there was this high intensity grazing happening, but then there was this big rest period that would follow. You know, bison wouldn't come back for 2 to 3 years. We have to, at some point, we have to come back to the foundation that, like, nature knows best, and we're not smarter than that. And we've completely gone away from that. So the bison were killed, so that pattern disappeared. And then after that, you'd have these massive herds of cattle coming up. And so you still had the high intensity, but there was no rest period. It was like hammer, hammer, hammer. And then after that, you know, the little townships started to pop up, and then everybody had cows. There was no fences. So then the cows just lived around, you know, the towns. And so since that time, there was this, like, the government recognized that there was this huge degradation, you know, over the course of 40 years that was happening in the arid West. So they came in and implemented what's called the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934, which basically cut the whole West into little pieces of pie and said, okay, Rancher Bob, this is yours. This is how many animals you can run. And so at that juncture, we completely transitioned from a high intensity, low time duration, the herd coming through and then not coming back, to this low intensity, high time duration, you know, 500 cows out there for 2 months. And what we witnessed through these pilot projects we've participated in is cows are predators. They hunt for specific grasses, typically the native grasses that are more nutrient dense. I've watched them, and they'll walk through all this green, but amongst that green, you have all these different types of grass. So they're hunting for the more nutrient dense ones, and they're leaving the less desirable grasses to grow. And that's why we see, like, this massive cheatgrass, you know, coming up from Cody. I mean, there's so much cheatgrass out there, and that, to me, that makes sense, you know, as to why. So, yeah.
In roughly the 1930s, we had 6.5 million producers, and then now we're down to 1.5 million. And so I met a gentleman here in Cody whose grandfather was around right after World War II. And the president went to somebody that had a lot of influence and said, we need to feed Europe. And so we need you to increase production so we can feed Europe, or they're going to starve. And the person he went to was uncomfortable with that for fear of what that might turn into, which was a massively controlled, captured market, which is what we're seeing today. And that's where Earl Butz said, get big or get out. What he said was, if you're a small producer, we have no space for you. And so that's where we had this massive die-off of our producers, and they became large and centralized. And then in 1980, Reagan changed the antitrust laws, which allowed the bigger corporations to start buying up the smaller food corporations. And so they only had control of about 25% of the market in the 80s. And after that was changed, that's what got us to the 85% control that we're dealing with now. So, you know, it's just like the BLM. The BLM, Bureau of Land Management, was established originally just to manage the West until the states were established. Well, you get power and control, and that's the last thing you want to give up. So here we are, 2024. Federal government still controls the vast majority of the land in the West, and that's resulting in faster desertification because of the lack of knowledge that these guys are discovering working with nature.
And the roadblocks, because of the systems that have been in place, we've been, for the last 2 years, this is our third year, we've been participating in a pilot project on BLM. So it's 6,000 acre permit. Last year we lived in a camper with my wife and kids, and we just intensively grazed this arid landscape. We brought in scientists to quantitate the data, just like, hey, are we doing good? Are we making a change? I just met with Snaplands. We were out there 2 days ago, and they're looking and they're like, your ecology is improving. Your, they look at 53 metrics, but just in 2 years, we can show a positive impact, but I can't use this on the rest of our ranch because if so we're moving electric fence, right? And so through the government SIP policies under the Tailored Grazing Act, like it is set up 100% to only do the low time duration or low density, high time duration grazing. If I wanted to go up onto the rest of my ranch and do this grazing pattern, I would have to have an archaeologist look at every like literally come out and every place I'm going to put an electric fence, check it to make sure we're not disturbing cultural. And they're literally right now in our BLM field office, the archaeologist is 2 years out on any projects. And so you're just nobody, like, why would you try? Like you literally have to have like a push, an ecological group to help streamline their process, because they're really at the local levels, they're really good intentioned, but they're just so mired down in paperwork, they don't have the human resources to do anything but file paperwork.
Yeah, and back to 1971 being a really important inflection point when Earl Butz was kind of appointed as Secretary of Agriculture, and of course we went off the gold standard. I think it's just important to, like you said, contextualize how money has really stuck a lot of people in the positions, and the consolidation has just continued to proliferate. So maybe that next point is, how do we get more producers doing what you're doing, RC? What are the biggest hurdles, or like how do you go about convincing them? And then AJ, of course, what you're working on is helping quite a bit to accelerate that.
I'd say the most low-hanging fruit is show them they can be more profitable doing this, which means charging more for your product. Right now is a really interesting time because we're seeing in the industry, the ranchers are getting a huge win. We've got, record cattle prices. But at the same time, you have, the big four packers that control upwards of 86% of the industry. And so I'm competing with them with my beef business. The rancher side of me is stoked. The meat side of me, I'm like, we're in deep shit. I have to raise my prices or I'd be more profitable selling them into the commodity norm. Yet you look and you see what's happening at the grocery store. I did this experiment. We own a little restaurant. If you're ever cruising through Tent Sleep, there's a place called One Cow. Stop through there. You can pay with Bitcoin and you can buy the best damn burger you've ever had. So I was like, had this euphoric idea. I'm like, this year we're going to sell low or high volume, low margin beef, and I'm going to outcompete the grocery store. So I went over to the local grocery store, which they gouge. They're 30% higher than if you're buying groceries in Fort Collins. I just had a buddy move up and he's like, dude, this is expensive. So I wrote down all the prices of their beef and I ran that through my spreadsheet with my costs. If I was to sell 20 head of beef at grocery store costs, not taking into account the grocery store margin or the distributor margin, I'd only lose $14,000. So the question is why are the big boys, why are they not raising their prices? And the only thing that makes sense to me, because we know corporate America, they love money. Why are they using beef as a loss leader? I think it's because they're not happy with controlling 86%. They have these like huge runways. They've made so much cash. They can lose money for, 6 months to a year and squeeze out a bunch of these independent distributors. And then, 2 years from now or a year from now, they've just got more control of it.
And I just want to jump in there because sunk cost fallacy is real. And I think the cost of food has been held so artificially low for so long because of the subsidies that are prevalent in our food system.
And even last night, we had an incredible ribeye here and it cost $47 and you're just like, holy shit, that's a lot of money. But if you think about it, you think about the nutrients you're getting from that food, because it's real food, and then you think about like RC's meat, his nutrient density off the chart, you have to play around with those numbers in your head and understand what is worth paying for. And that's where you get into the whole realm of exchanging value for value. So I think that's an important mind shift to have, but it's a challenging one given the sunk cost fallacy of the world that we live in.
This episode is brought to you by Wyoming Based, my new apparel company that is focused on providing high quality natural fiber based products using 100% US supply chains. Our first two products, the 100% wool everyday beanie and 100% wool rib sweater, are proudly made right here in Wyoming using local wool. The wool is low itch, high quality, and durable, naturally antimicrobial, and way better for your health and the health of the planet. If you want to support a local US brand and are tired of supporting woke outdoors companies that shill plastics, check us out at wyomingbase.com and pre-order your sweater and beanie today.
Yeah, you pay the farmer now or you pay the farmer later, right? And then the other side of that is, like, if you don't and we keep losing our producers, we have less than 800,000 ranchers in our entire country. 2% of the population is growing food for 98%. If people don't realize that we are on the precipice of famine in this country, because at the same time, you also have these big, here's my question, why aren't the big guys who sell so much meat fighting against the anti-meat crowd? Well, they've hedged their bets. They've diversified in both. And when you start looking into who's controlling those, big food and big pharma, there's some really similar parallels to what pharmaceutical companies did with homeopathic methods and natural medicines. They vilified them, and now they have the intellectual property of the medicines that they sell. Well, you've got lab-grown meat, you've got Beyond Meat, you've got all these other insect burgers that are showing up right at the same time that they're working on vilifying cattle as the cause for pollution, right? So I think there's an intellectual food property play happening as well, because if you can no longer buy from a producer, whether they exist or not, oh, but we have the solution, you can buy this lab-grown stuff. So it's about food sovereignty, not food security, because food security is, well, we're going to fill your belly with this junk that we made. Well, that's food security technically, but food sovereignty is what we're pursuing, the right for you to choose what you want to eat and not be told what you have to eat.
And do you think that's scalable? And this might be a trick question.
I think that we have to understand, like, while regenerative agriculture is the long-term goal and the pursuit, anybody that's ever tried regenerative agriculture and they went cold turkey off of their inputs, their soils collapsed. There's a transition phase. We need our feedlots. They're feeding America. We have 350 million people to feed. Like, we're in a position where we have to be smart about this, right? Kind of like EVs. If you want one, have one. But we live in Wyoming. Good luck. So we shouldn't. It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's starting to look at a long-term view of this and saying, okay, what's going to get us to where we want to go? We don't vilify any of our producers. We need all of them, and in fact, we need to increase. We need to create a new agrarian movement, so people that are exiting the city life. And by the way, homesteading is one of the fastest growing movements in our country. There's something like 2 million people just in the last 4 years that have left the communities where they were all centralized, and they're now growing food. So it's a process. So yeah, it is possible, but the consumers are the one that makes the decisions. And so that's what it means to vote with your food dollars, right? And our job, at what we see it from the farm, we're the marketers for our producers. Like, we're going to go out, just like Airbnb did with their platform, and try to get millions and millions of consumers to know if they come here, you're going to be able to shake the hand that feeds you and start that direct relationship. And if we're successful, look what Airbnb did with short-term rentals. They exploded because now if you have a little room to rent or a trailer on the side of your house, you can simply add that. And now you've got a source of revenue. If we duplicate that, we'll pave that path for our existing producers and new producers coming into it.
All right, we'll do questions in a little bit for everyone. But I think that's important to capture is voting with your dollar. I actually think food is the easiest way to make an impact in your local community. We're talking about Bitcoin, increasing Bitcoin adoption. I'm not going to lie, it can be very hard, and I've tried that for years. But food is pretty easy. You can go to your local farmer's market, you can verify where that food is coming from, trust, or you can trust them, but you can actually go to their operation, ask them to see it, and then you keep that money within the local economy. So to me, it's one of the biggest impacts you can have immediately, and then you're supporting people who are doing it the right way, like RC. And RC, I'm curious, AJ is mentioning this transitional period. How do you talk about that? Like, what if a rancher comes to you, they're conventional, what do you tell them?
Yeah, it's baby steps, just like anything. We're all impatient. It's like, well, let's just fix it. But the reality is, it's just like a process. And in the last couple of years, what we've it's been a hard pill to swallow. Is you're like, damn, this is my life's work. Like it'll take a lifetime to get from where we are now to where we want to be, and hopefully, the kids and they'll take up and champion that. But one of the most optimistic things that I've been seeing is working with Dr. Stefan von Vliet and Bionutrient Food Association. Audacious is, we see in corporate America in the grocery store, there's all these labels, and they're all full of shit. Like they're lying. They're just lying to you to make money. You have a load of organic grain, coming in from Ukraine, and they fumigate it. Like they'll literally fumigate it, and if they do get caught, the fines pale in comparison to the amount of profits that are made. I mean, and then when I said earlier, I don't like being put in the box, and it's even the organic. There's some awesome people out there that are raising real food, yet in 2020, 54% of organic labels were found in noncompliance. So it's just this label and this stamp, but the truth will always come out, and I think that comes in terms of quantitating the nutrient density of food, and that's what Audacious and Bionutrient Food are doing. We've had our meat tested, and it's man, compared to grain finished beef, which if that's what you're doing, great. In terms of human health, there's no comparison. You're gonna pay for it, but splitting hairs is get off the processed food. It's just there. And then if you want to, optimize your health, eat the most nutrient dense food, and your body will thank you. Your mental clarity and your brain waves, they fire, on a different level. So I think being able to sell, we will see very soon people starting to sell food based off of nutrient density and not water weight. And I think that'll be big because that has to come from biologically healthy soil.
Yeah, I think it's just getting to that moment of where you can't hide anymore, and that's why going to the source is the best protocol. AJ, I'm curious how you see on the education, well, both of you really, on the education front, how do we get more people aware? I mean, the movement is clearly accelerating. It has a lot of momentum, but we also all live in somewhat of a bubble and an echo chamber, and people are, driven by convenience. How are you attacking this? How are you thinking about education and kind of keeping this acceleration going?
That's where marketing comes in, right? Social media has done a lot of bad, but also a lot of good, because it's allowed so many producers to personally put their message out there and compete at that local level or at that organic level, because they have that messaging tool that didn't exist 10 years ago, when you only had the choice to take your livestock to the auction, because the amount of effort yet you only could go door to door or sit at a farmer's market to get people's awareness about your food, and you can't afford TV commercials and radio ads that the other guys are doing. So now there are so many incredible producers that are getting online, they're telling their family story, and that's what people want to know. People want to know. We're seeing this huge transition, especially during COVID, from just going to the grocery store and blindly just purchasing what's on there with fake labels, to they want to know the family before they know the product. And so being able to have that platform, whichever one you're using, to start telling that story is making a big difference. So we're going to lean into that, tell the story of the producers that we're supporting, and then really spend those dollars. That's our whole focus. We have a SAAS to do the transactions, but We are a marketing company, and it's to generate that awareness, and then they can go on our platform and then connect right with the producers and get to know them personally.
RC, how much has social media helped your business?
I mean, I don't know. We're only on Instagram. I think that would help if we were to diversify the portfolio, but it's like that double. Any producer who's on, I know Chloe's back there, but anybody that's on social media, like it turns into this, like, you almost need like a marketing person, right? Like it's a job. And it's like kind of like, I don't know, if you're into doing real things, I mean,
I feel the same way.
those likes are a little hollow, but it is, the speed at which information travels, depend on what you're consuming. If you're using it as a tool of education or just entertainment, it's been awesome.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Blessing and a curse. Okay, the final question, and then we can open it up to everyone. It's kind of two-part, and then it has to do with legislation. What do you think would be the biggest impact legislation could have in a positive way? Like, if X law was passed, this would be amazing. And if there are current, like, buckets of money that, you've tapped into or grants, and then what are your biggest fears or concerns with increased legislation or control, whether it's from the USDA, the FDA, or overall? Either one of you.
Thomas Massey's an incredible advocate for producers. He's pushing through the food freedom, that'll allow you to buy from your choice of person in your state, as long as it doesn't cross state lines. And in some cases, they're trying to blur that line as well. So that's really encouraging. Hopefully something like that happens. Individual states have already passed stuff like that where you can.
Yeah, we have that here in Wyoming,
Yeah.
courtesy of
Yep.
Tyler.
Yeah,
Lindholm,
exactly.
right there.
Yeah, so something like that would be great. Yeah. Yeah. What scares me is, there's this book called Red Famine, and it talks about the Holodomor in Soviet Russia, 1932 to 33, where 7 million people starved to death because they collectivized their farms and ranches, right? It was communism, so they could just tell them. They didn't have to go through Congress to pass anything. So now we have elected officials that you have to go through. Well, there's a policy right now. I mean, there's many policies that are going through that actually point to collectivization. You've got RFID ear tags for cattle so they can track every single head of livestock you have. It's not for every one of them right now. There's certain criteria, but just like anything else, it won't be long before they now tell you that every one of them has to have an RFID. The one that scares me the most is something that's in what they call the Sustains Act. The Sustains Act would actually allow private business to do open business with federal agencies. So imagine JBS, instead of paying these guys off under the table, which that's how JBS grew. They bribed 1,800 Brazilian officials, including their president, to grow at the rate they did. And our government still has them come in and give lectures to the USDA. So now JBS can then go sponsor or openly pay the USDA under this law to do business. You think that those people making that money from them will ever do anything to vote down something that would hurt them? They won't. So to me, that's one of the biggest concerns that I'm seeing right now is the Sustains Act, if that goes through, because they're just collectivization's coming through policy, and we have to really push hard. And the thing is a lot of these, like the RFIDs, they've been fighting that since 2002, and they just don't stop. And so if we become complacent because, we stopped it, and then we turn our heads, it'll just come through some other bill attached to, 1,500 other policies, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a worse spot. So those are the two things that concern me, and then what I'm hopeful for.
And to add to your RFID, the one class of animals that's not required is animal going to slaughter. And so if this whole thing is under, food safety, it's like, why is that one left out? My biggest concern, if we wanted to see some change, I'm really focused on the soil. And I guess as everybody drove up here, you could see the color of the river. Like you see all that sediment running off. Like I'm into regenerative grazing. I think that's how we fix the soil, because we have to start with the foundation, and the soil's, that's it. Like every piece of your body, it came from the soil, and we're watching it just run away. And so if we want to fix the ecology using cattle as a tool, which we're proving we have to have water. You know, you drive from here to all the way to Kansas, like water's limited. And that wasn't always the case. There used to be beavers, you know, and the beaver were all, you know, that keystone species were pretty much wiped out, trapped out. And then you know, without having those dams, the water was allowed to run harder and faster when you did have a rain event. And so that the beaver didn't come back into their historical grounds because the willows died out and there was nothing to eat. So planting these seeds, like creating these little like beaver locations and enabling over the course of 4 or 5 years for the willows come back, the beaver will show back up. The water tables will come up. We'll keep our sediment from running into the Mississippi, which just is you know, I think just downstream from here is Yellowtail. And there's like a $4 billion proposal on how to keep the sediment out. I was like, oh, we need to get those guys to come out to the ranch. I mean, we were just 2 days ago, we had this huge rain event last year, and I was nervous because I was like, this looks terrible. I mean, the cows all got into the corner of the electric fence, 2,000 animals, and they stomped it. And they were post-holing, which like sinking into the mud like that deep. You go out there this year, and there's like in every one of those hoof tracks, there's grass growing. And instead of the water running off, there's like a billion little dams rather than one dam that's got 1 billion gallons in it. And so I think that allowing for regenerative grazing to be more easily accessed by producers on public lands to restore, move us the other direction, because they enacted it to stop the degradation. And what it did is it slowed the degradation. But we have in 2020, there was a peers study that came out. There's 250 million acres on BLM. I'm not sure what there is on Forest Service, but public lands. Of that, 150 million is grazable. And they looked at 108 million of those acres, and they came back and their study showed that 70% of those acres failed to meet minimum land health guidelines. And so then they turn around, they blame the cows, they blame the livestock, and they're right. But it's not the cows, it's the grazing strategy that we're stuck to with the bureaucracy. So that would be huge.
Amazing. All right, well, open it up to questions. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. I know.
Thanks. RC, do you sell through like community share boxes, farmers market, or you're producing enough head that you are sending them off eventually to slaughter? Or what's your sales strategy downstream? And is your recommendation to us that, particularly for the work you're doing, AJ, that we buy big chest freezers and buy ourselves half a steer a year to feed our families instead of going to Albertsons?
Yeah, I mean, we do everything. We've got a restaurant that we're trying to sell into a local community, which is tough because people want the cheapest thing, you know. I sell loads of cows to much larger producers. We sell cattle because I mean we can't sell everything we have, so we still sell in the commodity market. We have a direct consumer. We were selling into the wholesale industry, and COVID kind of cured me of that. But yeah, I think if you're an independent producer, where we're at now is like the marketing and finding your customer base is really, really tough, and it's a full-time job. So depending on how much time you have, go it yourself. But if you can find people like AJ to collaborate with that are focused on that, that's a smart move.
What we're hearing from the customer side is they don't know much about quarter halves and wholes, right? Because they're not familiar with that. They go to the grocery store, buy what they need for a few days or a week. That's shifting. People in places I never would assume are buying deep freezers. Like they'll live in a condo, buy a small freezer, and it's there in the corner. I mean, I talked to one guy that his friends come over and they're like, "What is that?" He's like, "That's my food," because they're not familiar with the idea of deep freezers in these large urban environments. A lot of producers like to sell whole animals because it moves faster. They're not storing up lots of small quantities. But on another side, if you have monthly reoccurring revenue, that's really nice as well. So if you have small subscription boxes, 10, 15, 20 pounds, and you've got a couple hundred customers buying that monthly, you now have that reoccurring revenue there as well. It also allows people that don't have the deep freezers to still buy direct and put it in their small box freezer above their refrigerator. So we see both. It's, again, it comes back to marketing and education so that people know that those are options. If you're buying for your family, buying a whole animal is cheaper than buying smaller quantities. So, we fill our beef with a full cow every year just to make sure we've got it. And now, personally, with everything going on, we don't let it get below 3/4. So if we get through a quarter, we buy another quarter just to have it in there always.
You mentioned in passing the importance of water, and I just wonder if you're aware. I've seen evidence that the type of water that's used has a really strong impact on regenerative soil. I wonder to what extent you're aware of that.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, like really healthy bioactive soil cleans glyphosate out of the ground. I mean, it's just like this miracle that it'll break these things down that our science can't. And I read a study that said the half-life of glyphosate is 27 years in the soil. And I have a friend who lives in Lovell. He bought this land. It was called the Blue 40, and it was just bentonite. Like nobody wanted it. And he turned this thing into this like awesome. I mean, he's just like so smart. But he actually measured the water coming on, because the water coming onto his fields has already been through all these commodity fields from, Grable all the way down, and his fields clean the water. And so even at the state level, the whole conversation is the quantity of water, but there's no conversation about the quality of water that's being, coming off. Well, you're not going to rest it out. We've already tried that. So what the pilot project that we're participating in is we make those animals. If you force the cow to eat it, she's going to eat something. And so if you make them stay in that area and don't give them access to the whole acreage, they will eat it. And that's what we're proving out. And so it was like interesting, just like living, because I knew it all until I started doing this. I'm like, I'm a rancher. I know what I'm doing. And then just last year, sitting there and like living with the cows, that's when it clicked for me. Then I'm watching them, I'm like, holy cow, these things are predators. They're hunting for specific grasses. It'd be really cool to see if anybody has any studies on this. I can't find them, but I'll bet you that cow's giant nose has got like a spectrometer, because they nose it and they can sense which grasses to eat and not. So taking the tops, taking those seed heads off, and it's very timing specific when they will eat it. And, and then having this balance of like the cows still have to gain weight, it's like, it's a challenging proposition, but I mean, it works. I mean, yeah, yep. Because the grasses they're not eating just get, over the last 110 years, they proliferate because nothing eats them. And the native grasses, they just keep getting ate. A cow, like if a cow's there for 2 months, she'll eat it. So the plant roots go down and they go up. And so if a cow comes through and she cleaves it, that's how much root you leave. And if she comes back through 2 weeks later and she eats it again, and so these good grasses just keep getting weakened and weakened, while the less desirable ones are allowed, they have free run. Last year we just lived with them. So we bought a big camper and we lived in the hills with the kids, and it was every day, all day. Yeah. When it's hot, yeah. Well, we were out there for 2.5 months doing that. And so this year, I was like, this is our rest year. And so I talked to the BLM. I don't know if you notice, I'm kind of down on the BLM. I don't like getting told no, and they just tell me no. So I said, hey, there's this really cool technology called vents. They have these electric collars. You can control it from an iPad. It's super sweet. And I say, hey, what if we bring this technology to here? And they told me no, because we don't know, the Fed hasn't ruled on who owns the data. So that basically the Bureau of Land Management is being held hostage by this group called Western Waters Projects. And it's like, in my opinion, it's an ecological terrorist group that is like flying under the radar, basically saying, "Hey, we're here for nature," and they're not. It's a business model because they don't care what happens on the ground. They beat them at the process. Did you cross the T's? Did you dot the I's? And they've set precedent. So if like my representative, my liaison with the BLM is called a range con. And so they have proven that if they screw up, Western Waters Projects is just this group of lawyers that sue, and they can actually come back and sue the individual range con. So these people, like, you can talk about risk adverse. We're like, let's do stuff. And they're like, it's nuts. I mean, we were just told 2 days ago, so there's a lot of oil and gas development out there. And so for the past 40 years, they pump water out of the ground, use it for some process in the oil, and then they spill it out onto the ground. So we have this like riparian area that's like 3 miles long, and the EPA and DEQ just came back and said, we're drying your water up. And so here we're trying to graze, and we're like, we need water. And they're like, we're going to squirt it back down into the ground. And so there's just like, it's so stupid. None of it makes any sense.
And so I just see the dovetail coming, whether it's bird flu or something else, and they've got a lot more leeway at forcing you to kill your cattle if you don't inject them. And, I mean, it's I think a big threat that melds both, big ag, pharmaceuticals, and I think it has a big threat. What do you think? In terms of the possibility of them creating a pandemic out of a possible pathogen like the bird flu and saying, well, if you're not going to inject your cattle, we're going to have to put them down, and you don't have a choice, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I don't know enough to speak to what's going on. I just know they're not to be trusted. I'm not going to disagree with you. It feels like everywhere I look, not everywhere, but a lot of places I look, I just see boxes being, I feel like we're being forced onto the reservation if you believe in like expressing your own free will and eating what you want. But at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to just like your own taking ownership. And like at some point, I think you're just like headed to this day where everybody's like, no.
A lot of interesting things have happened very recently with the bird flu and with the mRNA. So the OCONUS bill that was passed had $15 million earmarked for the USDA for the RFIDs. And in the beginning, it's not going to be mandatory. We're just experimenting. And then a month after the OCONUS passed and they got that money, during that 1 month period, maybe 2 month period, there was also this increase in the news about bird flu. And now bird flu has gone from chickens to cattle to people. And as soon as that OCONUS bill passed, there was also, now it's becoming mandatory for RFID. And there's a lot of new news coming out that, oh, guess what? We are experimenting and learning that mRNA technology is really great for cattle for the bird flu. So you can just start connecting certain dots and make your own theories about that. But these are all coming out at the same time with the push for, anti-cattle and everything. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've seen it before. I mean, again, just the whole thing with the RFID starting in 2002. Well, there's an article in 2020 about the next big pandemic is going to be bird flu 4 years ago. And now that's all over the news that the next pandemic that we're preparing for is the bird flu. So it's happening. We're living it real time. And the people are the ones who will say yes or no.
Are you looking to get the benefits of grounding and earthing, but really just can't be barefoot all the time? Yes, you know what I'm talking about, right? Absorbing free electrons from the earth, improving your circadian rhythm and blood flow and vitality and redox. And that is why I'm excited that this show is brought to you by Rysel Shoes. Rysel shoes are, in my awareness, the only non-sandal grounded shoes. They have slip-ons and they have cool boots as well with laces that are not only grounded via a copper plug, but have leather outsoles made with water buffalo hide. So they're all natural. They are grounded and they're barefoot and minimalist with a wide toe box. This is imperative for foot health, and it's really going to keep you connected in a modern lifestyle setting so you don't have to walk around barefoot all the time. I love them in the winter time. I can wear socks with my slip-ons and not be freezing cold trying to be grounding. You need to check them out, folks. Rizal Shoes, RHIZAL.co. Rizal.co is their website. Use code DRadio at checkout for 10% off and get your shoes, get grounded, get connected, and improve your health.
No, actually, we're getting really good feedback that we're now able to start helping people find. That was the biggest thing that kind of was the aha moment. Producers are generally a private bunch, right? And being open and being on social media is not what's comfortable or normal. And consumers then also don't know how to find the producers, right? COVID showed that. Store shelves were empty and everybody's like, crap, where's the food? Well, I'm driving down the road and there's fat cattle standing in the field. There was just the disconnect. Nobody knew where to meet each other. And so now that we've launched our MVP and things are rolling really nice, people are starting to make that connection. However, the primary issue is producers having access to slaughter. There are parts of the country where that just does not exist. Like, they've got to drive 6 hours or more just to get their animals delivered to a processing facility. We moved to Cody to actually run the Wyoming Legacy Meats USDA slaughterhouse. I didn't know much about processing facilities other than, my cousin would drop it off live at one door and I'd pick it up in packaged meat on the other door. What happened in between? I have no idea. Now I've got my butt parked in the seat running a USDA facility, and if you would have told me that in 2020 when I started this, I probably would have quit. But that exposed the other part of this food supply chain issue, which is our slaughter. There's something like 10,000 state and federal slaughterhouses left in the entire country. That's a problem. So, typically I tell people, learn how to cut your own beef because you may need to. And the other part of that is then the labor in the slaughterhouses. Running this slaughterhouse here, it's very, very difficult to find somebody that's willing to work in a processing facility and do that kind of work. And so there's so many limitations that actually are in between the consumer and the producer. There's plenty of producers that, man, if they could trail their cattle down the range and know there's a family name attached to every single one, that's stability for the producer. But then you've got all those other things in between that are causing the problem. Yeah, because there's still a lot of producers that are selling to that commodity market, and so they're getting, right now it's good, but a lot of these guys know that that's a swing. It's an 8 to 12 year swing, and at some point the bottom's going to drop out. My cousins are like, well, why would I hold a cow longer, 6 to 9 months longer to fatten it when I can get probably the same profit from selling it into the commodity market? And the answer is, well, sell what you have to, but hold just a few % of that back. Because now if you shake the hand of the customer, now it's your customer, right? It's not the controlled customer of the big four that's in there competing in the auction. If you know that family, that's a way more stable process. So what's happening is a lot of these producers are starting to peel back a percentage because they've got people asking them directly. And they're getting them sold early as shares, or they know the demand's going to be there once it's processed.
What is the solution for processing? Kill wagons? State facilities.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Because to me, it seems like probably one of the biggest issues, and I don't really see a good outlook. And even here in Wyoming, like, we got a handful, right? And the smaller ones, they just don't seem like they're as good of quality. And I know RC has kind of bounced around because he wasn't happy with some of them. And it's like, yeah, what's the solution there?
Well, I was one of those that had problems.
You fixed it.
No, not yet. It comes down to labor on that side, right? But there's a company out there called Friesla. They make modular slaughterhouses that can actually be USDA certified and stood up in 6 to 9 months. And now it's a matter of where do they need to be and how to deploy them. What isn't the answer are large-scale slaughterhouses. I consulted for one in Utah recently. They're doing 200 head a day. To me, that's even too big. I think small 120 a week so that you've got the sustainability of that size is probably right, but then they should be deployed in where they're needed throughout the country where they're shy. There's a lot of producers that are looking at ways to have their own facilities so that they can be vertically integrated, because what we dealt with for my family's ranch is our customer base started growing really well in 2019. And COVID hit, and I called our local slaughterhouse, and they're like, yeah, we can get you in 18 months. Business was over. I've got monthly consumers waiting for their delivery, and I can't deliver because there's no place to get them processed. So the real answer is we don't know yet. I think this, necessity is the mother of all invention. And so when people are hungry and it's going to be an issue, I think we'll start to see some priority shift and maybe people get involved. With our service, I thought I was super smart and was only going to deal with bits and not atoms, just the ether and not physical projects. But as we learned the need for slaughterhouses, we're committed that if they're needed in a certain area where we can't serve that population, hopefully if we're successful enough, we'll start dropping them where they're needed.
Yeah, I think that the average steak travels like 2,000 miles before it hits your plate. And it is like, it's really efficient, like on the operation side. But like AJ said, it makes more sense to have, I was thinking like, okay, how many animals are in an area, and then size a plant that's like, more local than even regional, and then figure out your outlets from there, and just keep your shipping. It's so much more efficient. You can put 80 cows on a semi in a box, or you can put like 35 big ones live, and it costs us about the same amount of money. So I think there's some operational efficiencies to be had there.
Yeah, beef initiative's great. I think we're talking a lot about like the scary stuff, but also in the work I've done over the last 4 years, I've met some really incredible people that have come out of the woodworks to do this. We know the government ain't fixing this. And so the citizens are stepping up all across the country. Beef Initiative, there's Farmish, there's Croft. I mean, there's many of them. We're very clear that we should not be the only one. There should be many others doing what we're doing. Then that collective voice will start driving people away from the existing marketplace into these fractional ownerships where they can support the producers. I think the question to ask when you're looking for credible is, what's their long-term goal? Are they looking to build a company and exit? Our country was built on legacy businesses. I think building something just to turn a profit and exit needs to change. You need to have some real convictions for why you're doing these things. And so if you want to know if they're credible, ask them what your exit strategy is. If they have one, be careful. We will never sell. That's the one commitment we have. We will never sell. We aren't taking venture capital. We are funding this through the people. And it's actually working because people are awake to that.
I think it's a great place to end. Thank you so much, guys. Let's give it up for them.